A nature photographer went for a solo hike in Gifford Pinchot National Forest to capture the perfect sunset shot, but she never returned, vanishing without a trace in the Washington wilderness. Then, 6 years later, an explorer makes a shocking discovery beneath fallen cedar branches, disturbing evidence that shatters everything investigators believed about her disappearance. Before continuing, let us know where are you watching from today. Also, subscribe to Storyboat, because we upload daily stories like this. Let's begin our story. The Pacific Northwest mist clung to the towering Douglas firs as Jennifer Walsh squinted through the gray morning haze, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. At 31, she'd grown accustomed to these weekend searches, her hiking boots finding purchase on the slippery carpet of pine needles and moss that covered the forest floor of Gifford Pinchot National Forest. The damp cold seemed to seep through every layer of her waterproof jacket, settling into her bones with the familiar ache of another fruitless morning. "Jenny, we should probably think about heading back," called out Michael, one of the regular volunteers who'd been joining these searches for the past 3 years. His face was flushed red beneath his wool beanie, condensation fogging his glasses as he paused to catch his breath. The steep terrain of the Cascade Range foothills had a way of humbling even experienced hikers, and Michael's labored breathing echoed through the quiet forest. Jennifer looked around at the small group scattered among the massive tree trunks. 6 people total today, down from the 20 who used to show up regularly when the case was still fresh in the media. 6 years had a way of wearing down hope, transforming it into something else entirely. What had started as desperate searches for a missing person had long since become grim expeditions looking for closure, for any trace of what had happened to Rebecca Walsh. "Yeah, you're right," she replied, her voice barely carrying over the soft patter of moisture dripping from the ancient cedar branches above. Rebecca's sister pulled out her GPS device to mark their search area, the small screen glowing blue in the filtered forest light. They'd developed a systematic approach over the years, methodically covering different sections of the vast wilderness. The Washington State Patrol had long since relegated the case to their cold files, only responding to specific tips or leads that came in sporadically from hikers or hunters. But Jennifer couldn't let go. Rebecca was her only remaining family. Their parents had died in a house fire 3 years after Rebecca's disappearance, leaving Jennifer as the sole keeper of her sister's memory. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like the heavy mist that never seemed to fully lift from these mountains. "All right, everyone," Jennifer called out, her voice carrying across the moss-covered boulders and fallen logs that littered the forest floor. "Let's pack it up for today. Make sure you've got all your gear." The sound of zippers and rustling backpacks filled the air as the volunteers began their careful descent back toward the Forest Service road where their vehicles waited. The hike back took 45 minutes, their boots squelching in the muddy sections where mountain springs crossed the trail. Ancient western red cedars stood like sentinels around them, some over 500 years old, their massive trunks scarred by centuries of storms and fires. This was the kind of pristine wilderness that Rebecca had loved to photograph. The reason she'd been drawn to these remote areas with her camera, always chasing the perfect shot of light filtering through the canopy. When they finally reached the gravel parking area, everyone dispersed to their respective vehicles with tired waves and promises to meet again next weekend. Jennifer popped her trunk, tossing in her backpack and search equipment, noting how the routine had become as familiar as brushing her teeth. The digital clock on her phone read 11:15 a.m. as she pulled it from her pocket, finally getting signal bars after hours in the communication dead zone of the deeper forest. Her screen lit up with notifications like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails. Her heart rate spiked when she saw they were all from the same source. Detective Sarah Rodriguez from the Washington State Patrol. Rodriguez had transferred from Las Vegas Metro 5 years ago and had taken a personal interest in Rebecca's case, one of the few law enforcement officers who still returned Jennifer's calls. She hit the call back button immediately. The phone rang once before Detective Rodriguez's familiar voice filled her ear, carrying an urgency that made Jennifer's stomach clench. "Jennifer, thank God. I have been trying to reach you for the past 2 hours. I'm sorry, Detective. I was out in the forest with my search group, no signal. What's happened? Is everything okay?" There was a pause, and Jennifer could hear muffled voices in the background, the sound of radios crackling with police chatter. Her grip tightened on the phone as she leaned against her car, suddenly needing the support. "Are you still at Gifford Pinchot?" "Yes, we just got back to the parking area near the Swift Creek entrance." "Detective, what's going on? You're scaring me." Another pause, longer this time, filled with the kind of weighted silence that precedes life-changing news. Jennifer's eyes tracked to Michael and Sarah, two of her most dedicated volunteers, who were loading their own vehicle nearby. They'd noticed her distress and were watching with concern. "We've had a development in your sister's case," Detective Rodriguez said carefully. "An explorer found something this morning that we believe belongs to Rebecca." The phone slipped in Jennifer's sweaty palm, nearly clattering to the gravel. Michael and Sarah, who had been loading their own vehicle nearby, noticed her distress and hurried over. The forest around them suddenly felt too quiet, too still, as if the ancient trees were holding their breath. "What kind of evidence?" Jennifer managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you drive to the Cascade Creek area? It's on the east side of the forest. I'll send you the exact coordinates." "Of course, yes. I'll leave right now." "Good. I'll text you the location. There will be multiple patrol cars and Forest Service vehicles at the site. You can't miss us." After ending the call, Jennifer looked up at the concerned faces surrounding her. "They found something," she said, her voice shaking despite her effort to stay calm. "The detective wants me to meet her at Cascade Creek." Without hesitation, Michael placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're coming with you." Her phone buzzed with the coordinates from Detective Rodriguez. She plugged them into her GPS, noting the location was about an hour's drive through winding mountain roads. 3 other volunteers, Tom, Linda, and David, agreed to join them, forming a small convoy of vehicles. As they left the Swift Creek area, the landscape shifted subtly around them. The forest grew denser, older, with massive stumps scattered throughout that spoke of the logging operations that had once dominated these mountains. The roads became narrower, more remote, leading them deeper into wilderness that few people ever saw. Rebecca had always been drawn to these forgotten places, areas where the hand of man had barely touched the ancient ecosystem. Jennifer's hands trembled on the steering wheel as they navigated the serpentine mountain road. 6 years of searching, 6 years of hoping and fearing in equal measure, might finally be coming to an end. As they approached the coordinates, she spotted the cluster of official vehicles through the trees, their red and blue lights creating a surreal aurora against the green backdrop of the forest. Her sister's long journey home was about to begin. Detective Sarah Rodriguez stood beside her unmarked patrol vehicle, her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun that had grown slightly disheveled during the morning's work at the crime scene. At 42, she'd seen enough tragedy in her career to know how to deliver devastating news. But something about this case had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was the way Jennifer Walsh had never given up. Or maybe it was the haunting similarity to her own sister, who'd gone missing in Nevada 15 years earlier and was never found. The site was about a mile from the Forest Service road where they'd arranged to meet. The terrain was too rough for regular vehicles past the designated parking area, accessible only by 4-wheel drive Forest Service trucks and specialized search equipment. Rodriguez watched as Jennifer's convoy pulled into the makeshift staging area, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she was about to reveal. "Jennifer," she called out as the younger woman emerged from her car, noting how Jennifer's face had gone pale during the drive. "Before we go to the site, I need to prepare you for what we found." They gathered near the detective's vehicle, Jennifer's volunteers forming a protective semicircle around her. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing patches of blue sky through the canopy, but the forest still felt heavy with moisture and the weight of secrets about to be revealed. "It's not good news, Jennifer," Rodriguez said gently, "but after 6 years, at least it's answers." Jennifer nodded, unable to speak. Her legs felt unsteady, each breath requiring conscious effort. The smell of damp earth and cedar filled her nostrils, mixing with the metallic scent of fear that seemed to coat her tongue. They climbed into 2 Forest Service trucks, the vehicles specially equipped for the rough terrain that lay ahead. The ride was bumpy and uncomfortable, following what could barely be called a trail through dense undergrowth and around massive fallen logs. When they finally stopped, Jennifer could see a cluster of people ahead. Crime scene technicians, uniformed officers, Forest Service personnel, and what looked like search and rescue teams. A temporary canopy had been erected to provide shelter for an evidence collection area, its bright blue tarp looking alien against the ancient greens and browns of the forest. As they hiked the remaining distance on foot, Detective Rodriguez fell into step beside Jennifer. "I want you to meet the person who made the discovery. He's been incredibly helpful and respectful throughout this process." They approached the canopy, where a man in his mid-40s stood beside a black and white border collie. The dog sat alertly, occasionally sniffing the air with the intensity of a working animal. The man wore practical outdoor clothing, worn hiking boots, cargo pants, and a fleece jacket with the logo of a wilderness survival school. "Jennifer, this is David Torres. He made the discovery this morning." David was a weathered man with kind eyes and the lean build of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He removed his baseball cap respectfully when Rodriguez made the introduction. "I'm so sorry for what you're going through," he said quietly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who understood the gravity of the moment. "I was training scout here on wilderness tracking," he explained, indicating the border collie. "We were working on a new section of forest I'd never explored before, much deeper than my usual training routes. Scout suddenly became very focused on something under a fallen cedar tree." His voice took on the precise quality of someone who'd already given this account multiple times to investigators. Jennifer's gaze dropped to the evidence table where various items were laid out, tagged, and photographed under the portable lighting system the forensics team had set up. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw them. Bones, unmistakably human, weathered by years of exposure, but still clearly recognizable for what they were. "It was an arm bone," David continued gently. "A humerus from the upper arm. I recognized it because I used to be an Army medic before I got into wilderness instruction. Once I realized what Scout had found, I marked the GPS coordinates and called 911 immediately." Detective Rodriguez guided Jennifer closer to the evidence table, her hand resting supportively on the younger woman's shoulder. "After Mr. Torres's call, we sent our forensic team out immediately. There was a severe windstorm 2 nights ago, probably the worst we've had all season. We believe it brought down that old cedar and scattered remains that had been protected beneath it for years." Jennifer forced herself to look at the collection of bones, her vision blurring with tears she'd been holding back for 6 years. But it was the next piece of evidence that made her knees buckle and her world tilt on its axis. "This is how we suspected it might be your sister," Detective Rodriguez said, pointing to the longer bone with metallic hardware still attached. "You mentioned in your initial report that Rebecca had shoulder surgery." Jennifer's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, 8 months before she disappeared. Rock climbing accident at Smith Rock. She had a titanium plate and screws put in her left humerus. The serial numbers on the hardware match her medical records perfectly," the detective confirmed. "We're still waiting for DNA confirmation." but we're confident it's her." The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. 6 years of hope, of imagining scenarios where Rebecca had somehow survived, was just living off the grid somewhere with her camera and her dreams. All of it crumbled in the face of these weathered bones laid out on a folding table in the middle of nowhere. "Oh, God," she whispered, then louder. "Oh, God, it's really her." Michael wrapped a supportive arm around Jennifer's shoulders as her legs threatened to give out completely. But Detective Rodriguez wasn't finished, and her expression grew even more somber. "Jennifer, there's more." She gestured to a separate section of the evidence table. "We found additional remains, smaller bones, found in a protected crevice, deeper under the tree root system." The implication hit Jennifer like a sledgehammer. Rebecca's baby. The child that Rebecca had been so excited about. The pregnancy that had made her glow with happiness in those final weeks. The forensic anthropologist believes they're consistent with the fetal remains at approximately 20 to 22 weeks gestation, Detective Rodriguez continued, her professional demeanor barely masking her own discomfort with having to deliver such devastating news. Some bones show evidence of scavenger activity. Black bears and cougars are common in this area, as are smaller predators. Jennifer couldn't hold back the sobs anymore. 6 years of searching, of maintaining hope against increasingly impossible odds, of imagining Rebecca somewhere safe with her baby, living a different life. All of it destroyed by the reality of these scattered remains under a fallen tree in the deep forest. "What about Marcus?" she managed to ask between gulps of air, referring to Rebecca's boyfriend, the father of the child she'd been carrying. "Did you find?" "No," Detective Rodriguez replied carefully. "We found no remains that we can definitively identify as male. The search team is still working, expanding the grid, but so far nothing." "How can that be?" Jennifer's voice rose in confusion and anguish. "They were together that day. Rebecca posted that photo on Instagram from the trailhead that morning. They were supposed to hike to Sunset Falls together." The detective's expression was carefully neutral, the practiced look of someone who'd learned to deliver terrible possibilities with professional distance. "That's one of many questions we need to answer. Without evidence of Mr. Chen's remains, or any sign of what happened to him, we have to consider all possibilities." Jennifer stared at her, the implication slowly sinking in. "You think Marcus did this? That's insane. He loved her." "They tried for 2 years to have that baby. He's an environmental scientist. His whole life was about protecting places like this." "I understand this is difficult to process," Detective Rodriguez said calmly. "But in cases like this, we have to examine every angle. The fact that only your sister's remains have been found, in such a remote location, concealed beneath natural cover, these are factors we can't ignore." Jennifer shook her head vehemently, her voice growing stronger despite the tears streaming down her face. "Marcus wasn't even an experienced hiker. Neither of them were, really. That's why I told them to stick to the marked trails, especially with Rebecca being 5 months pregnant. They told me they were just doing the easy loop trail to Sunset Falls." She gestured toward the dense forest surrounding them, the massive trees and rugged terrain that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The idea that he could have navigated this far into the wilderness, done something to her, hidden the body and then disappeared himself, it doesn't make sense. This is miles from any established trail. "People can surprise us," Detective Rodriguez replied gently. "Even those we think we know well. But you're right that there are many questions that don't have easy answers. That's why we need to re-examine everything from the beginning." The detective gestured toward the Forest Service road, where crime scene tape marked off a wider perimeter. The remains were found beneath that fallen cedar, partially protected by the root system, and covered by years of accumulated forest debris. It's possible they've been here the entire time, preserved by the natural shelter, until that windstorm 2 nights ago, brought down additional branches and exposed them. "So, what happens now?" Jennifer asked, exhausted by the emotional toll of the past 2 hours. The forest around them had taken on an oppressive quality. The towering trees that Rebecca had loved so much now, feeling like silent witnesses to an unspeakable tragedy. "We'll transport everything to the state crime lab in Seattle for full analysis and DNA testing," Rodriguez explained. "We'll need a DNA sample from you for comparison, since you're Rebecca's biological sister. The investigation will be reopened as an active homicide case, and we'll be bringing in additional resources." Jennifer nodded numbly. The finality of it all was beginning to sink in. After 6 years of uncertainty, of clinging to the possibility that Rebecca might still be alive somewhere, the hard evidence scattered across that evidence table made denial impossible. She walked over to where David Torres stood with his border collie, needing to thank the man who had finally given her answers, even if they weren't the ones she'd hoped for. "Mr. Torres," she said, her voice hoarse from crying, "I want to thank you for calling it in, for doing the right thing. I know this must have been traumatic for you too." David's eyes were sympathetic, reflecting the weariness of someone who'd seen more than his share of tragedy during his military service. "I'm just sorry it had to be such devastating news. Scout and I hike out here several times a week. We know these forests better than most people. But this particular area, with that old-growth cedar grove, we'd never explored before. I guess it was meant to be. Would it be okay if I contacted you later? My sister would have wanted me to thank you properly." Her voice broke again as she spoke about Rebecca in past tense, the finality of it cutting deep. "Of course," David replied quietly. "Detective Rodriguez has all my contact information. Take all the time you need." Detective Rodriguez approached them again, consulting her notebook. "Jennifer, we should head back to the staging area. The forensic team will be here for several more hours. But there's nothing more you need to see right now. We'll need you to come to the State Patrol office for the DNA sample and to review the original case files." As they prepared to leave the scene, Jennifer caught a final glimpse of the forensic team still working methodically around the fallen cedar. Crime scene photographers documented every angle, while technicians carefully collected soil samples and searched for any additional evidence that might have been scattered by the storm. The ancient tree that had served as Rebecca's tomb for 6 years now looked like a crime scene from a television show, surrounded by yellow tape and the clinical efficiency of the investigation process. The journey back to the Forest Service road passed in a blur of pain and disbelief. When they arrived at the staging area, Jennifer was surprised to see that media vans had already arrived, their satellite dishes and camera crews creating a small circus in the remote forest location. News of the discovery had leaked quickly through police scanner traffic and social media. "You can follow us to the State Patrol office," Detective Rodriguez said. "Or, if you'd prefer, I can have an officer drive your car and you can ride with me. This has been a lot to process." Jennifer looked at her trembling hands, then at the keys she clutched like a lifeline. "I don't think I should drive right now." "That's perfectly understandable." Rodriguez motioned to a young trooper. "Officer Kim will take care of your vehicle." As Jennifer handed over her keys and slid into the detective's unmarked car, she caught a final glimpse of the forest that had swallowed her sister 6 years ago. The towering Douglas firs and ancient cedars that had seemed so beautiful and peaceful during her weekend searches now felt ominous, full of secrets that might never be fully revealed. During the drive to the State Patrol office, Detective Rodriguez filled in more details about the investigation timeline. "The forensic anthropologist will be able to tell us more about time of death, possible cause, and the condition of the remains. The fact that they were partially protected means we might have more evidence than we initially thought." "What kind of evidence?" Jennifer asked, grateful for something concrete to focus on, rather than the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume her. "Fabric fragments, personal items that might have been missed in the initial searches, possibly even trace evidence from whoever was responsible. Rodriguez's tone remained professionally hopeful. After 6 years, it's remarkable that we found anything at all. Most outdoor crime scenes this old have been completely compromised by weather and wildlife. As they drove through the small mountain communities that dotted the region around Gifford Pinchot, Jennifer noticed how normal everything looked. People going about their daily routines, shopping at small stores, walking their dogs, completely unaware that her world had just shattered completely. The disconnection between her inner devastation and the ordinary world continuing around her felt surreal. "Detective," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something. Do you really think Marcus could have done this? In your professional opinion?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. "In my experience, domestic violence can escalate quickly, especially during pregnancy when stress levels are high. But I also know that jumping to conclusions based on limited evidence can derail an investigation. Right now, we follow the evidence wherever it leads." "But he's been missing just as long as she has," Jennifer protested. "If he killed her, where has he been for 6 years? And why would he kill the baby he wanted so desperately?" "Those are exactly the questions we need to answer," the detective replied. "Which is why we're reopening this as an active investigation. We'll be looking at everything: their relationship, their finances, any problems they might have been having, Marcus's background, and any other people who might have had contact with them around the time of their disappearance." The State Patrol office appeared ahead of them, a modern building that looked more like a corporate office than a police station. As they pulled into the parking lot, Jennifer steeled herself for the next phase of this nightmare: providing DNA samples, reviewing case files, and beginning the long process of finally laying her sister to rest. The Washington State Patrol building loomed before them, its modern glass and steel facade reflecting the pale afternoon sun that had finally broken through the forest canopy. Detective Rodriguez escorted Jennifer through the main entrance, past the security checkpoint, and into the bustling interior where troopers and civilians moved with practiced efficiency. The antiseptic smell of the building felt harsh after hours, breathing the clean mountain air, and the fluorescent lighting made everything appear washed out and clinical. They entered a small medical examination room where a forensic technician waited with a collection kit. The woman, whose badge identified her as Maria Santos, offered a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. She'd clearly processed many victims' families over her career, and the routine of collecting DNA samples from grieving relatives had become as familiar as any other administrative task. "This will just take a moment, Miss Walsh," Maria said gently, snapping on latex gloves with practiced movements. "I need you to open your mouth, and I'll swab the inside of your cheek." Jennifer complied, feeling the cotton swab brush against her inner cheek with uncomfortable thoroughness. The process felt invasive, despite its simplicity, as if surrendering some essential part of herself to confirm what her heart already knew with devastating certainty. "That's all we need," Maria said, carefully sealing the sample in a sterile container. "The lab will run the comparison as priority. We should have results within 48 to 72 hours. Though in cases like this, where the hardware identification is already conclusive, it's really just a formality." Detective Rodriguez thanked the technician and led Jennifer up 2 floors to the Criminal Investigations Division. Her office was modest but organized, with case files neatly arranged on shelves and a large whiteboard covered in notes from various investigations. The walls were decorated with commendations and photographs from crime scenes, creating an atmosphere of professional competence mixed with the grim reality of violent crime. Rodriguez pulled out a thick manila folder that had grown considerably since the original investigation. Jennifer recognized her sister's name on the tab, written in the careful block letters that police used for official documentation. "I've reviewed the original case file multiple times over the years," the detective said, settling into her chair across from Jennifer. "But I'd like to go through everything again with you, now that we have new evidence. Sometimes details that seemed unimportant at the time can take on new significance. Jennifer nodded, steeling herself for the emotional gauntlet of reliving that terrible day 6 years ago. The office felt too warm, and she shrugged out of her hiking jacket, revealing the dampness that had soaked through her shirt during the morning's emotional ordeal. Tell me about that Sunday again, Rodriguez continued, opening the file to reveal crime scene photos, witness statements, and timeline charts. October 8th, 2018. Walk me through everything you remember about your last contact with Rebecca and Marcus. If Marcus is alive somewhere, he might try to make contact. Or if someone else was involved in what happened to Rebecca, they might feel threatened by the renewed investigation and the media attention. People do desperate things when they feel cornered. The thought that Marcus might still be alive, that he might try to contact her, sent conflicting emotions coursing through Jennifer's system. Relief that he might not be dead, horror at the possibility that he might have been responsible for Rebecca's death, and confusion about what his survival would mean for the investigation. "You think I could be in danger?" she asked, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I think it's wise to be cautious," Rodriguez replied carefully. "If anything unusual happens, strange phone calls, someone following you, anything that seems off, I want you to call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." Jennifer stood, her body feeling heavy with exhaustion, both physical and emotional. The day that had started with routine searching had become a journey into nightmare, and she sensed it was far from over. "What about the search team at the discovery site? Did they find anything else?" Detective Rodriguez shook her head. "They've expanded the grid and brought in additional resources, including cadaver dogs, but no additional remains so far. They'll continue tomorrow, weather permitting. The forecast is calling for heavy rain, which could complicate the search efforts." As they walked together back toward the main corridor, Jennifer felt the weight of eyes on her from other officers and staff. Word had clearly spread about the development in the Rebecca Walsh case, and she could see the mixture of sympathy and professional curiosity in their faces. "One more thing," Rodriguez said as they reached the elevators. "We'll need you to stay available over the next few days. Once we get the official DNA confirmation, we'll need to discuss funeral arrangements and the release of your sister's remains. There will also be media requests that you'll need to decide how to handle." The elevator doors opened, and Jennifer stepped inside, feeling like she was descending not just to the ground floor, but into a new reality, where her sister was definitively dead, and the man she'd trusted as family had become the prime suspect in her murder. The drive home from the State Patrol office felt surreal, as if Jennifer was navigating through someone else's life. Every familiar landmark, the gas station where she and Rebecca used to stop for coffee, the small mountain town where they'd bought hiking gear together, the scenic overlook where Rebecca had taken some of her best forest photographs, now felt like monuments to a life that had been violently cut short 6 years ago. Jennifer's house sat quietly on its wooded lot, looking exactly as she'd left it that morning. Except now, everything felt different. The weight of finality pressed down on her shoulders as she dropped her keys on the entry table and collapsed onto her living room sofa. The silence felt oppressive after the institutional noise of the police station, and she found herself straining to hear something, anything, that might distract from the flood of memories threatening to overwhelm her. Her gaze fell on the collection of family photos arranged on the built-in shelves. Her parents, killed in that house fire 3 years after Rebecca's disappearance. Rebecca and Marcus, at various stages of their relationship, camping trips, holiday celebrations, the day they'd announced the pregnancy. Now she truly was the only one left, the sole keeper of all these memories that would die with her. Unable to bear the silence any longer, she made her way to her bedroom and opened her laptop. On impulse, she navigated to Rebecca's photography website, which she'd maintained as a memorial for the past 6 years. The portfolio, was filled with breathtaking images of the Pacific Northwest wilderness, misty, morning shots of old-growth forests, dramatic sunset silhouettes of mountain peaks, intimate details of moss-covered logs, and delicate wildflowers. One photograph caught her attention, taken just 2 weeks before Rebecca's disappearance. It showed the interior of the small cabin that she and Marcus had purchased near Mount St. Helens. Rebecca's camera equipment arranged on a rustic wooden table next to a window that framed a perfect view of the mountain. The caption read, "Setting up my new home studio. Can't wait to raise our little photographer in this magical place." The memory hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Rebecca's journals and personal photography equipment would still be at the cabin. In all the chaos of the investigation and her own grief, she'd never gone through Rebecca's personal belongings. If Marcus is alive somewhere, he might try to make contact. Or if someone else was involved in what happened to Rebecca, they might feel threatened by the renewed investigation and the media attention. People do desperate things when they feel cornered. The thought that Marcus might still be alive, that he might try to contact her, sent conflicting emotions coursing through Jennifer's system. Relief that he might not be dead, horror at the possibility that he might have been responsible for Rebecca's death, and confusion about what his survival would mean for the investigation. "You think I could be in danger?" she asked, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I think it's wise to be cautious," Rodriguez replied carefully. "If anything unusual happens, strange phone calls, someone following you, anything that seems off, I want you to call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." Jennifer stood, her body feeling heavy with exhaustion, both physical and emotional. The day that had started with routine searching had become a journey into nightmare, and she sensed it was far from over. What about the search team at the discovery site? Did they find anything else? Detective Rodriguez shook her head. "They've expanded the grid and brought in additional resources, including cadaver dogs, but no additional remains so far. They'll continue tomorrow, weather permitting. The forecast is calling for heavy rain, which could complicate the search efforts." As they walked together back toward the main corridor, Jennifer felt the weight of eyes on her from other officers and staff. Word had clearly spread about the development in the Rebecca Walsh case, and she could see the mixture of sympathy and professional curiosity in their faces. "One more thing," Rodriguez said as they reached the elevators. "We'll need you to stay available over the next few days. Once we get the official DNA confirmation, we'll need to discuss funeral arrangements and the release of your sister's remains. There will also be media requests that you'll need to decide how to handle." The elevator doors opened, and Jennifer stepped inside, feeling like she was descending not just to the ground floor, but into a new reality, where her sister was definitively dead, and the man she'd trusted as family had become the prime suspect in her murder. The drive home from the State Patrol office felt surreal, as if Jennifer was navigating through someone else's life. Every familiar landmark, the gas station where she and Rebecca used to stop for coffee, the small mountain town where they'd bought hiking gear together, the scenic overlook where Rebecca had taken some of her best forest photographs, now felt like monuments to a life that had been violently cut short 6 years ago. Jennifer's house sat quietly on its wooded lot, looking exactly as she'd left it that morning. Except now, everything felt different. The weight of finality pressed down on her shoulders as she dropped her keys on the entry table and collapsed onto her living room sofa. The silence felt oppressive after the institutional noise of the police station, and she found herself straining to hear something, anything, that might distract from the flood of memories threatening to overwhelm her. Her gaze fell on the collection of family photos arranged on the built-in shelves. Her parents, killed in that house fire 3 years after Rebecca's disappearance. Rebecca and Marcus at various stages of their relationship, camping trips, holiday celebrations, the day they'd announced the pregnancy. Now she truly was the only one left, the sole keeper of all these memories that would die with her. Unable to bear the silence any longer, she made her way to her bedroom and opened her laptop. On impulse, she navigated to Rebecca's photography website, which she'd maintained as a memorial for the past 6 years. The portfolio was filled with breathtaking images of the Pacific Northwest wilderness, misty morning shots of old-growth forests, dramatic sunset silhouettes of mountain peaks, intimate details of moss-covered logs, and delicate wildflowers. One photograph caught her attention, taken just 2 weeks before Rebecca's disappearance. It showed the interior of the small cabin that she and Marcus had purchased near Mount St. Helens. Rebecca's camera equipment, arranged on a rustic wooden table next to a window that framed a perfect view of the mountain. The caption read, "Setting up my new home studio. Can't wait to raise our little photographer in this magical place." The memory hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Rebecca's journals and personal photography equipment would still be at the cabin. In all the chaos of the investigation and her own grief, she'd never gone through Rebecca's personal belongings. The cabin had been searched by police in the initial investigation, but they'd been looking for clues to her disappearance, not preserving her artistic legacy. Jennifer glanced at the window, noting there was still plenty of daylight left. The thought of waiting until tomorrow felt unbearable, as if the discovered remains had created an urgency to connect with Rebecca's memory while the pain was still fresh and real. If she went to the cabin now, she could gather Rebecca's journals and photography equipment, start planning some kind of memorial that would honor her sister's artistic vision. The drive to the cabin took her deeper into the foothills of the Cascade Range along winding roads that grew increasingly remote with each mile. Rebecca and Marcus had chosen the location specifically for its isolation and proximity to the pristine wilderness areas that Rebecca loved to photograph. The cabin sat on 5 acres of mixed forest, connected to the main road by a quarter-mile dirt driveway that had been challenging to navigate even when it was well maintained. Now, after 6 years of abandonment, the driveway was nearly impassable. Jennifer's car scraped against overgrown brush as she navigated around fallen branches and washouts from winter storms. The forest had begun to reclaim the property, with sword ferns and Oregon grape growing wild in what had once been a cleared yard. The cabin itself sat quietly among towering Douglas firs, looking smaller than she remembered. The cedar shingles had weathered to a silver gray, and moss was beginning to claim the north-facing roof. A pile of soggy newspapers and mail sat on the covered porch, evidence of how completely the property had been forgotten by the outside world. Jennifer had maintained the property taxes and basic utilities for the first year after the disappearance, hoping against hope that Rebecca and Marcus would return. Eventually, financial reality had forced her to let most services lapse, keeping only the minimal requirements to prevent the county from condemning the property. She used her key to unlock the front door, stepping into the familiar scent of cedar and the mustiness of a house too long closed up. The interior was exactly as Rebecca had left it, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. Photography equipment covered every surface: cameras, lenses, tripods, and editing equipment that represented thousands of dollars of professional gear. Rebecca's laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, its screen dark, but somehow expectant. Jennifer climbed the narrow stairs to the loft bedroom that Rebecca and Marcus had shared. The space felt especially intimate and heartbreaking, with Rebecca's maternity clothes still hanging in the small closet and pregnancy books stacked on the nightstand. A framed ultrasound image sat on the dresser, the grainy black and white photo showing the tiny form of the child who would never be born. She searched the obvious places first for Rebecca's personal journals: the bookshelf, the dresser drawers, the desk in the corner that Rebecca had used for business correspondence. Nothing. Then she remembered Rebecca's secretive nature about her personal writing. Her sister had always been protective of her private thoughts, treating her journals like the sacred space they were for her creative process. Jennifer studied the bedroom more carefully, looking for hiding places. Rebecca had mentioned once that the cabin had some interesting architectural features, including built-in storage that the previous owners had added. Her eyes fell on what appeared to be a simple wooden panel in the wall beside the bed, but something about its proportions seemed slightly off. She pressed along the edges of the panel until she found a hidden latch. It clicked open, revealing a shallow space behind the wall that contained several leather-bound journals, Rebecca's backup hard drives, and a small wooden box that Jennifer recognized as their grandmother's jewelry box. She pulled out the most recent journal, its leather cover worn smooth by Rebecca's hands. Opening it carefully, she saw her sister's familiar handwriting filling every page. The entries were dated, the most recent from just 3 days before the disappearance. Jennifer settled onto the dusty bed to read, eager for this final connection with Rebecca's thoughts and feelings. The early entries were filled with joy about the pregnancy, excitement about the cabin, and detailed observations about the natural world that Rebecca was documenting through her camera. But as Jennifer read deeper, a different tone began to emerge. Rebecca had been worried about something in those final weeks, something she hadn't shared with anyone. "Marcus has been acting strange lately," one entry read, dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. "He's always been passionate about his environmental work, but this is different. He comes home from the field, agitated, almost angry. When I ask him about it, he just says he's discovered some things that are making him question whether he can continue working for the Forest Service." A sound from outside made Jennifer freeze. A car engine idling somewhere near the cabin. She moved to the bedroom window, peering through the dusty glass. A dark SUV was parked at the head of the driveway, partially hidden by the overgrown brush. 3 men were climbing out, and something about their purposeful movement toward the cabin made Jennifer's blood run cold. She watched as they approached the front porch with confident strides, not like visitors or lost hikers seeking directions. The man in the lead wore a distinctive red and black flannel shirt that looked eerily familiar. Her mind raced, trying to place where she'd seen that particular pattern before, when suddenly it hit her with devastating clarity. It was Marcus's shirt. She'd seen him wear it dozens of times during family gatherings and outdoor adventures. He'd been wearing it in several of the photographs downstairs. But the man wearing it now was definitely not Marcus. He was shorter, stockier, with a completely different build and facial structure. Jennifer's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the implications. These men had access to Marcus's belongings, which meant they knew where he was, or what had happened to him. The sound of them testing the front door handle sent adrenaline flooding through her system. They weren't knocking or calling out like legitimate visitors would. They were trying to get inside. She clutched Rebecca's journal to her chest and crept toward the stairs, her mind racing through possible escape routes. The cabin had a back door that opened onto a small deck, but it was visible from where the men were working at the front entrance. The bathroom window was too small to crawl through, and the bedroom windows were too high above the ground for a safe jump. The metallic scraping sound of someone working on the front door lock made her decision for her. She had to hide and hope they would leave quickly. Jennifer squeezed into the small closet in the bedroom, pulling the door shut just as she heard the front door creak open below. Thanks for watching. If you want second part of this story, let us know in the comment section.